Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, to this live stream, which is celebrating a small achievement and also a chance to explore something that's been on my mind the last couple of weeks. It's a bit of an impromptu stream. I uh, I was supposed to be doing marking today, lots of university marking, but the essays haven't come through. And so I thought, well, I've got some free time, I've got some spare time, and I wanted to do something because I hadn't managed to stream for a few weeks, for a few months even. It's just been very busy. And I wanted to do something in particular because recently the channel has managed to get 1,000 subscribers. And this was in part due to Carlisle Day. Some of you may have seen Carlisle Day, where there was all these YouTubers producing uh, videos on the life and work of Thomas Carlyle. And it was a great success. There was really good contributions, very imaginative, and in every video there was something that you could learn from. And I produced a few videos for this, and thanks to the coverage that the day got, my channel managed to get over 1,000 subs. And I just wanted to say that I'm really grateful to everybody who's watched my videos over the last year or so. I'm particularly grateful to all those of you who are very supportive of the channel and really encourage me with the videos that I'm making. And here's to the next lot. And I hope I can continue to develop more ideas and engage you in more interesting discussion. So, on that note, let us turn to the topic for today. And this video is going to be a bit different from other videos that I've made on the channel. Usually, what I do is I take a topic that I've studied or know about and I analyze it. Or I take two topics and kind of see the connections. So, for example, uh, one of the live streams I did a while back was on analyzing kind of wokeism as a form of Protestant ideology, that it shares many characteristics. Or I'll do videos on like Thomas Carlyle and studying his work. That tends to be most of my channel in that regard. But today, what I wanted to do is something a wee bit different. I wanted to put forward some of my own ideas about some things that I've been thinking about quite a lot. And there's going to be influences that I'll touch on that have influenced the way I've been thinking about things. But it's a bit more my own view or my own creative thought. So we'll see how that goes, and if it doesn't live up to your expectation, please let me know. I'm very interested to hear. But I think it'll be something that should be of interest because what I'm going to be talking about concerns our beliefs. In particular, three things that I've observed in my own experience of myself and in other people that I know, and then also more generally in culture. And these are the three observations that I think require some form of explanation. The first is that intellectual discussions or discussions about what to believe are often highly emotional. You can see this in a wide array of topics. For example, whether we should reduce corporation tax. For some reason, this gets people very heated. Or it could be on immigration. It could be on whether there is a God or not. People get irate about this question. It could be a whole manner of things, whether you should have a bin placed on your local street or not. When I say intellectual, what I mean by this is simply questions of whether we should believe something is true or false, or right or wrong, etc., etc. It deals with questions of what is real, but also what we should do. And these seem to get us emotionally charged. And there's no specific logical reason why these things should be so emotive. Indeed, many times you can go into environments and discuss these things in forceful and forthright ways without people becoming overly emotional or almost at points of screaming. Whereas we've seen in the last year or so, the way people engage each other in discussion, if it can even be called that, often boils over into rage, anger, screaming at one another. You see this particularly in protest marches. We've seen it with the Black Lives Matters protests, the climate activist protests, and a whole range of such events. We see people, in theory, discussing ideas, but doing so in a very vitriolic and vehement way. And in Parliament, you also see this, especially in the British Parliament. One speaker and after gets up, and though they're discussing the legislation before them, it's often done so in very emotional terms, with a lot of emotion trying to be raised. I think of somebody like David Lammy, who's almost shouting at the opposition for what they are doing as a crime against humanity or something like that. So that is the first thing to think about, is why are intellectual discussions, sincere discussions, often emotional? The second thing that I want to think about is, why is it so easy to predict a person's belief or belief systems if you know one of their beliefs? I'll give you an example. If you met somebody who self-identifies as a socialist, so somebody, or radically left or something like that, then it is reasonable to assume, and you'll probably be correct, that they support climate activism and maybe affiliated with something like Extinction Rebellion, that they would also support racial or social justice, and thus BLM. They would also support or identify as an ally of LGBT. They would probably support strikes at your local university or something like that. They would be pro-immigration, but they'd also probably be pro-lockdown, indeed maybe a stronger form of lockdown. They may be pro-European Union, and the list goes on. We've probably all know people like this, but it doesn't just work that way. You can do it the other way around. So somebody identifies as libertarian, or at least conservative libertarian. Let's go with that. Conning, as it might be called. Well, you know that they're for lower taxes. They probably affirm some forms of traditional values or family and society. Probably want a reduction on immigration. They're skeptical about they'll say not climate change, but the proposals that are being put forward to deal with climate change. And they would probably be more questionable on their support of LGBT. Maybe they think it's acceptable, but it shouldn't be celebrated. They probably would oppose the strikes at your university, and so on. So you can predict pretty well, with maybe a few exceptions here and there, based off one belief, where that person ends up in other areas, which aren't logically connected. There's no reason why being pro-lockdown, for example, would be tied to somebody who's typically pro-immigration. Indeed, you might think that they're contradictory. The same would be true of climate change. If we want to reduce climate change, surely we should want to reduce the amount of travel between countries. And yet, the people pushing for greater control or radical changes to society to deal with climate change are also pro-immigration. So there's no logical reason why these things are connected in the belief systems of people. And yet, you can predict. So I want to explore why that is the case. And thirdly, and this is probably the most depressing one, I want to explore how it is, or why it is, that people can change their beliefs on a sixpence, or on a dime if you're an American viewer. Let me give you an example. So Barack Obama president of the United States a few years ago, when he was in power, he introduced on the southern border of America cages, and these were to help with filtering the immigration from South America to the United States of America. And at the time, there was very little backlash against this. And indeed, the most left-wing kind of commentators didn't have any real problems with Obama doing this. However, when Donald Trump became president, this became a huge issue for them. Indeed, it was used against Trump. He was targeted as, and, essentially for purporting a racist policy which had connotations of Nazi Germany. And this was particularly evil because it was separating children from their parents, who were ending up living in squalor and inhumane conditions. However, when Joe Biden became president, these cages still exist, and these cages are still separating parents from their children. However, all the clamour that was around Trump doing this has disappeared. It doesn't just work for left-wing people, though. I'm reminded of how Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain before Boris Johnson, who was leader of the Conservative Party, in when she stood for election as Prime Minister, quite a number of her policies were actually borrowed from the manifesto of Ed Miliband, who was the former leader of the Labour Party. And while they were his policies, the Conservative Party fought against them. They said that these principles, such as a cap on energy prices, was wrong because it prevents the freedom of the market. However, as soon as it becomes conservative policy, suddenly the Conservatives and their supporters are saying this is a good thing. So this isn't just confined, though, to the political. It might be a religious leader who changes their view. So in Mormonism, you have a living tradition of apostles. There are living apostles today. They're not the same as the apostles from the New Testament. They are the new apostles. And they can make pronouncements which change the nature of how the religion is lived. So, for example, there used to be much more emphasis on bigamy, but then some apostles have declared that it is inappropriate in the modern society. So suddenly, Mormons no longer are expected to practice bigamy. It just changes. And then Mormons who follow this suddenly start defending it. There are many such examples. So I think that's something worth thinking about too, that people's beliefs can change very quickly. And it doesn't seem, it's not just that their beliefs change, they take up positions they formerly argued against without there being any significant conversion experience or fundamental change in their lives which might have produced such a change. So these are the three things or three observations about people's beliefs, that they're often tied to emotion in various ways, that they're easy to predict, and that they quickly change. These all need explanation. They need to be explained in some way or interpreted. Why is this the case? And the first thing I want to do in that regard, I'll lay out my basic thesis and then move through why I think this could be a possible explanation. So my view over some time of reflection is that actually there is a strong component of non-rationality within our beliefs, or a non-rational component. And this is that our beliefs are badges or performances of loyalty to various individuals and groups. And so this would help to explain why they are laden with emotion, why they are often connected to other beliefs which are not logically connected, and why we often change our beliefs very quickly. So to defend this, the first thing I want to do is kind of run through a little history of philosophers who have thought that various kinds of beliefs are caused not by our kind of rational thinking, but by our emotions or our emotional responses. This, at the very least, could be an explanation of all three of these, and we'll kind of question that in due course. But perhaps one of the most famous advocates of this position was the Scottish philosopher David Hume. Hume famously declared that reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions. Now, the passions is a very technical word, and it doesn't mean exactly the same thing as emotion. There's been a lot of research done on this in the last 20 years or so, and prior to the 19th century, emotion primarily meant a civil disturbance, perhaps roused by passions or affections, but it was primarily associated with mob activity. Rather, people spoke about their feelings in terms of affections and passions. And the passion, to kind of summarize a long debate, could be understood as a psychosomatic change which is brought about by the apprehension and evaluation of an object. And this object, apprehended by the senses or remembered, is either good or bad for us, and it causes thus a response in us. We want to either go towards it, attain it if it is perceived to be good for us, and we want to flee or fight it if we think it is bad for us. And this could also be true of the affections, by and large. To understand Hume's point, we need to really touch on Augustine, because Augustine, he adapted what the Stoics believed about the passions into a Christian framework. The Stoics held that there were four basic kinds of passion. There is desire, so that's a kind of motion towards something which we think is good for us, we evaluate it's good for us, but we don't yet have it. It's in our future. If we get it, that arouses the passion of joy, because we possess what we believe is good for us. And if it is indeed good for us, it will be to our benefit. If there is something that is not currently present, but is imminent, which we apprehend to be evil for us, then that arouses fear. We fear this thing and we don't want to get near it, so we try and get away from it as far as possible. However, if we cannot avoid this object of evil, it arouses sorrow. We are in the state of sadness. Now, Augustine, by and large, agreed with this characterization of the types of passion that there are, but he believed that they could all be reduced to one fundamental passion or affection, that of love. And for Augustine, love is not just a sentimental feeling, it is a disposition by which one is directed towards something as an end in itself. Put another way, we think or evaluate something to be our highest good, our supreme good, the thing that which will fulfill us and satisfy us forevermore. It will perfect our human nature. It's very Aristotelian in kind of conception. And what we love, fundamentally, we consider to be our supreme good. And so we are absolutely directed towards it. Our wills want that thing above all else. And all our other thoughts, feelings, and actions are instrumental to the attainment of this absolute good. So we desire what we love, and we enjoy what we love. We fear that which will obstruct what we love, and we are sorrowful when there is something present which is preventing us from getting what we love. In this way, Augustine reduced all of these passions down to love and maybe desire, love and desire. So when David Hume, who's writing within this tradition, inherited through Scottish Calvinism, it was a very Augustinian religious tradition that Hume was raised in. When he says reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions, he's affirming two things at the very least, which Augustine affirmed about the passions. First and foremost, that it is the passions which move our activity. What we love for Augustine is that which motivates our thinking, our feeling, and our acting. It is the principle which drives us, because we seek that which will satisfy us. And the same could be seen for Hume. For Hume, a passion is an internal impression, I'm quoting here, the internal impression we feel and are conscious of when we knowingly give rise to any new motion of our body or new perception of our mind. Reason is a slave to the passions because it is the passions which can motivate, which can set on fire our various capacities. Reason itself cannot do this. It is inactive. It must be activated by the passions. And this relates to the kind of second point. The passions for Hume dictate what we are aiming towards, our supreme good, as it were. He wouldn't use that language. Maybe what we consider our ultimate end or something as an end in itself. The passions declare that. They push us towards that. And reason is instrumental. It seeks to work out ways in which we can attain that ultimate end. So for him, the passions are the primary feature in human nature to a large degree. They direct what we believe, and this is why reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. For Hume. Turning to another Scot, we can look at Thomas Carlisle, who there's been a great deal of attention to in the last wee while on YouTube. And he doesn't want to say that the passions are the cause of our beliefs. He wants to be a bit more specific. He argues in his lectures on heroes, hero worship, and the heroic in history that actually it is those feelings associated with religion that direct our thoughts. And I'm going to read a passage here which articulates what Carlyle thought religion was and its connection to this question. It is well said, in every sense, that a man's religion is the chief fact with regard to him. A man's or a nation of men's. By religion, I do not mean here the church creed which he professes, the articles of faith which he will sign and, in words or otherwise, assert. Not this wholly, in many cases not this at all. We see men of all kinds or of professed creeds attain to almost all degrees of worth or worthlessness under each or any of them. This is not what I call religion, this profession and assertion, which is often only a profession and assertion from the outworks of the man, from the mere argumentative region of him, if even so deep as that. But the thing a man does practically believe, and this is often enough without asserting it even to himself, much less to others. The thing a man does practically lay to heart and know for certain, concerning his vital relations to this mysterious universe and his duty and destiny there, that is in all cases the primary thing for him, and creatively determines all the rest. That is his religion, or it may be his mere skepticism and no religion. The manner it is in which he feels himself to be spiritually related to the unseen world or no world. And I say, if you tell me what that is, you tell me to a very great extent what the man is, what the kind of things he will do is. Of a man or a nation, we inquire, therefore, first of all, what religion they had. Was it heathenism, plurality of gods, mere sensuous representation of this mystery of life, and for chief recognized element therein physical force? Was it Christianism, faith in an invisible, not as real only, but as the only reality? Time, through every meanest moment of it, resting on eternity? Pagan empire of force, displaced by a nobler supremacy, that of holiness? Was it skepticism, uncertainty, and inquiry whether there was an unseen world, any mystery of life except a mad one? Doubt as to all this, or perhaps unbelief and flat denial? Answering of this question is giving us the soul of the history of the man or nation. The thoughts they had were the parents of the actions they did. The feelings were parents of their thoughts. It was the unseen and spiritual in them that determined the outward and actual. Their religion, as I say, was the great fact about them. In these discourses, limited as we are, it will be good to direct our survey chiefly to that religious phasis of matter. So, Carlisle is saying here, first and foremost, his definition of religion, which is not the creeds or beliefs of a religion as they are professed, nor is it institutional allegiance to a certain denomination, but rather those deep feelings we have which concern our relationship to the spiritual world or lack thereof. Or put another way, it is those feelings which are aroused by our relationship with reality and how we configure those or respond to those in our thoughts and actions. So the feeling is primary and it directs what we believe about the world or what we believe at all in that matter. So for Carlisle, there's a very strong connection or a very strong idea that emotion or passion is that which is primary and our beliefs flow from this. It's not that we believe something first and then feel. We feel something in response to the world and thus we believe X, Y, or Z, whether it be paganism, Christianism, or atheism. We'll return to Carlisle in a bit. So pushing these ideas a bit further in the history of philosophy, we can look at the movement of logical positivism. Probably its chief representative is the philosopher A.J. Ayer. And A.J. Ayer espoused a doctrine called Verificationism. And it is the idea that any meaningful proposition, or a proposition can only be meaningful if its content can, in theory, be verified by empirical experience. Let me repeat that. So, verificationism is the doctrine that propositions, so kind of statements or our beliefs, are only meaningful or have meaningful content if the content could, in theory, be verified by empirical observation. So it's a very strong form of empiricism. And Ayer would have seen the sciences as the chief place in which this would make sense. Scientific propositions, in his view, can be verified through empirical observation. And this is building off Karl Popper's theory of falsification, that scientific theory can be, a theory is scientific if it can be falsified. Ayer's kind of twisted this and saying, actually, no, it's if it can be empirically verified. But notice what that means for anything that cannot be verified by empirical observation beyond kind of tautologies or mathematic truths. What this means for religious statements, ethical statements, political statements, really anything that cannot be verified using observation, is not that they're false, but for Ayer, they're meaningless. They have no meaning. They don't mean anything because, so to say God exists, well, I cannot empirically verify this. I cannot possibly see God or anything like that. As a consequence, it's not even just a false statement, it's just a meaningless statement. It doesn't mean anything for air. So what is it then? Why do people have such statements? Why do they have such beliefs if they're totally meaningless? Well, Ayer has an answer, and it's primarily in the field of ethics that he's interested in answering this question. He would say that ethical statements, so let's take one, it is wrong to steal. He deals with that as a question. Well, most people would say that's a kind of can be true or false. It's either objectively true that it's wrong to steal, according to maybe moral laws, maybe set out by God, maybe they're part of the universe, or it's morally wrong. Or maybe other people will say it's subjectively true or false. So it might be true for you that it's given your values, but it might be false for me given my values. Ayer wants to say no, ethical statements are neither true nor false because you can't empirically verify them. However, what they really are expressions of emotion, what he would call emotives. And these shouldn't be conflated with William Reddy's theories of emotives in the history of emotions. What Ayer is saying is when you say it is wrong to steal, what you're really expressing is something like, I don't like stealing. He puts it as boo to stealing. By contrast, if you say it is good to be charitable, it's morally right to be charitable, what you're really saying is, hooray for charity. I like charity. It gives me pleasure. So for Ayer, ethical statements are purely statements expressing emotions, what we like and dislike about people's activity. And I guess you could extend this idea to all meaningless statements for Ayer. Religious statements would also probably have a similar function. They just express emotion. Another thinker who had a very similar point of view on this is Pareto. Pareto shared Ayer's logical positivism. We look in one of his texts, he has the following categorization. All propositions can be divided into two categories. Into the first, which, to be brief, we will call X, we will put affirmations which can be verified experimentally. Into the second, which we call Y, we will put those which cannot be verified experimentally. Science only deals with propositions X, which are the only ones amenable to proof. Everything which is not included in this category X remains out of science. And Pareto believed that those beliefs which are not empirically verifiable, they are neither true nor false in a real sense. Rather, they are just beliefs that are post hoc rationalizations of our emotions. And indeed, we only believe them because of our emotions. It is what he would call the sentiments and residues. So religious beliefs, ethical beliefs, and so on. We believe these because we must believe something. We feel we must believe something. And these sentiments then, they're more an expression of what we feel about the world than they are of any proof or rational belief. So we're already moving through from kind of Hume and Carlisle that emotion is the cause of various beliefs as a kind of, because they help us to gain what we fundamentally desire, to a view that certain beliefs are just mere expressions of emotion. And now I want to go even further and look at a thinker who believed that even scientific beliefs are in fact motivated by emotion a lot of the time. And this is Thomas Kuhn. Well, Kuhn was reacting against the sort of view you just heard, like Karl Popper's theory of science, which is that a scientist puts forward a hypothesis and it can either be, and they try and find a way to falsify it. Once it's falsified, you move on to a new hypothesis. And so knowledge progresses because we slowly but surely find out what's not true and get closer and closer to the truth, never reaching the truth as a whole ultimately, because that's largely impossible from a inductive or deductive process in that way, but we can at least progress in our knowledge. Kuhn thought this was a very naive understanding of the scientific method, not as an ideal, but in practice. Kuhn believed that rather than this succession of kind of hypotheses being verified or falsified, rather what we have are scientific revolutions. What you start with is maybe a great innovative thinker. Let's take Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein, Charles Darwin, and they produce a theory or a set of theories with values and methodological assumptions built in, which challenges an old dominant theory. So Newton's laws of physics are challenged by Einstein's theory of relativity. And as the problems with the older theory become more and more evident, there's a shift towards the new paradigm. And this paradigm becomes the framework within which most scientists who are not Newton and Einstein, but kind of more regular work, they go to town and working within this paradigm. And the motivations for paradigm shift or continuance are often non-rational. So, for example, it could be due to funding. There may be more money being put towards studying within one paradigm than another, so scientists start working within this new paradigm. Another reason is emotion. People will be doggedly defending one set of theories because that's the one that they've been spending their whole life working on. Indeed, Kuhn even points out that oftentimes paradigm shift occurs when an older generation of scientists die out. Why would that be? Well, the older generation are committed to one type of scientific paradigm. And so when they die out, well, there's no one loyal to the old paradigm left. You can see this in a variety of ways. I think one really interesting example is what would you call them? Virologist, is it? Perhaps. Neil Ferguson, not the economist or historian, but this chap is at King's College London, and he is the guy who developed the models for predicting the impact of COVID-19 on the UK. And his models predicted hundreds of thousands of deaths. Now, this is a model that he used previously for other diseases, and they were shown to be quite inaccurate or wildly off. However, he stuck with his model, and it became the basis for the UK's response to COVID. Now, whether or not, I'm not an expert in these matters, but it strikes me that he stuck with his method despite there being significant questions against it. And even after his initial projections seemed to be quite misguided, he's continued to stick with his methodology. He's loyal to it. It's his. He doesn't want to give it up. That would show that the last 20 years of his work have been disproven or wrong in some way, and concede to other scholars that they were right. So that's a good example of how non-rational factors, the fact that his models have been falsified, doesn't mean that scientists change their beliefs. This is what Kuhn draws our attention to, and even somebody like Paul Feyerabend takes this to its most extreme. Be that whatever the case with that, you can see that there's a number of thinkers who have considered that a lot of our beliefs are motivated not by rational consideration, but by what we feel, whether that be in pursuit of some object, non-scientific statements, or indeed scientific beliefs themselves. And so when it comes to the three observations I've made, well, this might be one explanation for why intellectual debates and our discussions around politics, religion, and so on, science as well, are often so emotionally charged. If our statements are nothing more, or at least motivated by our emotions, that they are expressions of what we feel, then undoubtedly it's going to be a very emotional affair. Indeed, if it's as Eyre suggested, that ethical debates are really I dislike this or I like this, then there is no real ground for uh, rationality in that, and there's no room for moving on a rational basis. It was only if there's changes in feeling within the debate. And so to oppose somebody's position in such a debate would be to challenge their their fundamental inclinations. It's a very personal attack then. However, this kind of theory cannot really address the two other observations that I've come across. So, okay, maybe it can explain why our debates are emotionally charged, but it cannot explain why it is easy to predict what a person's beliefs if you know one of their beliefs. So, say their beliefs are expressions of their emotions. Well, I can't then determine what else they're going to believe because I don't know what else they feel. I can't see their feelings. So it doesn't really explain how you can quite accurately predict people's beliefs. And it also doesn't explain why people change their positions to those their opponents used to hold. You might say, well, oh, maybe they've had a change of emotion, a change of feeling. But then that begs the question, why did their feelings change? What happened in their lives that made them feel differently about this belief than they did before? Until we get to that, we cannot really explain the change of belief. And I suppose that refers to the former point as well. Okay, maybe you can perhaps map certain feelings to certain beliefs, but why do those feelings associate with certain beliefs? So something more is needed in this explanation than the theories we've just looked at to explain these facets of human belief making or the motivations behind belief. So this is where I want to bring in Carlyle's theory of hero worship, because I do think that it gives us an insight into why this is the case. I think it will help us to see more clearly what the issue is and how. Well, I'll get to it. Let me read you the following passage from Carlyle, which is his discussion of what hero worship is. And now, if worship even of a star had some meaning in it, how much more might that of a hero? Worship of a hero is transcendent admiration of a great man. I say great men are still admirable. I say there is, at bottom, nothing else admirable. No nobler feeling than this of admiration for one higher than himself dwells in the breast of man. It is to this hour, and at all hours, the vivifying influence in man's life. Religion, I find, stand upon it. Not paganism only, but far higher and truer religions. All religion hitherto known. Hero worship, heartfelt prostrate admiration, submission, burning, boundless, for a noblest godlike form of man. Is not that the germ of Christianity itself? The greatest of all heroes is one, whom we do not name here. Let sacred silence meditate that sacred matter. You will find it the ultimate perfection of a principle extant throughout man's whole history on earth. Or coming into lower, less unspeakable provinces, is not all loyalty akin to religious faith also? Faith is loyalty to some inspired teacher, some spiritual hero. And what therefore is loyalty proper, the life breath of all society, but an effluence of hero worship, submissive admiration for the truly great? Society is founded on hero worship. All dignities of rank on which human association rests are what we may call a hierarchy, government of heroes, or a hierarchy, for it is sacred enough withal. The duke means dux, leader. King is conning, canning, man that knows or cans. Society everywhere is some representation, not insupportably accurate, of a graduated worship of heroes, reverence and obedience done to men really great and wise. Not insupportably inaccurate, I say. They are all as banknotes, these social dignitaries, all representing gold, and several of them, alas, always are forged notes. We can do some forged false notes, with a good many even, but not with all, or the most of them forged. No, there have to come revolutions then, cries of democracy, liberty and equality, and I know not what. The notes being all false, and no gold to be had for them, people take to crying in their despair that there is no gold, that there never was any. Gold, hero worship, is nevertheless as it was always and everywhere, and cannot cease till man himself ceases. So Carlyle's concept of hero worship is the idea that, first and foremost, there are great men, and he'll define these later, especially in his chapter on the Prophet Muhammad, as people who are totally submitted to the laws of the universe in everything they are, and they're completely sincere in this. This might take various cultural forms or manifestations. So the Prophet Muhammad may have an Arabian culture influencing the way he formulates his submission, just as Oliver Cromwell has a particularly Puritan bent. But in the main, they all share this absolute submission to accepting the way of the universe as good, and that they should pursue this absolutely. And when we apprehend such an individual, we are almost compelled to admire them, to follow them, and ultimately be loyal to them. And loyalty for Carlyle is akin to religious faith. And so this connects hero worship to what Carlyle said about religion earlier on. That if religion consists in those feelings we have regarding the world, and these feelings motivate our thoughts and actions, well then hero worship, which he says is the proper essence of religion, is that which motivates our thoughts and actions. That is, our loyalty to a hero is what causes to arise the way we think, what we believe, and how we behave. This is a contentious point of view, of course, and I will need to do some work here to perhaps defend this position. But let's just take a pause for a second, and I'm just going to have a look at the chat see what's been going on, and then we'll kind of move on to the next stage in the argument. So, good morning, Matt. Good to see you, and good to see Mongolian Doggerland, Matthew Sad, Byron Brand Stepwise. Good to see you all, and to all those who are lurking outside of the chat, good to see you too. Hyper-empiricism, I think you're referring to the logical positivism there. Yes, they really took Hume's kind of understanding of empiricism as far as they possibly could, and to try and get away from, I guess, subjectivity in some ways. That's how Lewis would see it. It's a total attempt to get at objectivity. Of course, the failure of logical positivism is the idea, or the proposition, that only those things which can be verified by empirical observation are meaningful is itself incapable of being empirically verified. So, by its own standard, the doctrine is meaningless. So it fails on that front. And maybe this is perhaps a good summary of that position. Good to see you from the US, Matthew. Is this in reference to this must be in reference to Thomas Kuhn, I think. I think that's when you were saying it. Yes, Tyler, I even shouted out the lurkers. You mean so much to me. You all do. You all do. Well, let me move on to kind of the next stage, which is really exploring what it means to say, just before I crack on, Byron Brand, I will address that at the end of the stream, but there is plans in the works for an Origins of Equality 2 and 3. So I'll give you more details at the end. So, yes, the idea that hero worship is that which motivates our beliefs. Let's think about this a wee bit. If we think of our beliefs as propositions about the world, as I guess you could say that fundamentally our beliefs are things that we believe either to be true or false, or at least they take that form. Whether or not they are, as we've seen, is a different question. And this could include a whole range of things, even ethical questions. If we believe it's right not to steal, what we're really saying is, I believe it is true that it is right not to steal. This is just an inherent quality of our beliefs. And as a consequence, our beliefs change how we act in accordance with other people. They influence, because if you're telling me how the world is, that's going to change how I relate to the world and thus to other people. At the same time, if our beliefs then are tied to hero worship in various ways, then to challenge somebody's belief is to challenge their hero worship to a certain degree. Let me get into why that might be the case. So, I seem to have mislaid my note here. My apologies, chaps. So it might be easier to work through the three observations I've made and show how they connect to hero worship in that regard. Yes, I have found it. I have found it. So I think one of the key things is what I would call the Doctrine of Resonances, and this is kind of my own idea here, and there's probably other names for it. You could say associations, But if I put forward a couple of ideas, I'm just going to say a couple of ideas. So the idea of free speech. Now, what do you think of when I say that? You may think of various principles. You may think of various libertarian ideas that everybody has a right to express themselves freely. It's very identified with the American context, right? But you probably also had a certain feeling in response to those terms. Free speech probably arouses some kind of emotional feeling, even if it's little. You may also have thought of various people that are connected to this idea or associated with this idea. So in the British context, somebody who spends his time constantly shouting for free speech is the actor and now turned politician Lawrence Fox. Perhaps you thought of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. I think he's the chair. How about if I say conservatism? You may have thought of Boris Johnson, the leader of the Conservative Party, or a very conservative politician. You may have thought of Roger Scruton, the great philosopher, or Edmund Burke, for that matter. Now let's try climate activism. You may have thought of Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg, David Attenborough, or a whole host of other people. Reactionary philosophy. Immediately in my mind, there is an image of Thomas Carlisle. The point I'm trying to make here is that these words, which are often involved in our beliefs, so say, for example, I believe free speech is a natural right of every individual, or every individual has the right to freedom of expression. This is a belief in its own right. It has its own logical content, which is self-contained, but it has a series of resonances. At least when somebody hears this statement will resonate with various associations that they connect it to. And these associations typically are not just ideas, abstract ideas, but to people and to groups. This in itself highlights the fact that many of our beliefs are in fact tied to people in our minds, in the way we think about the world. And I think a particularly notable example of this is in a religious context, which Carlisle mentioned. Most of the major world religions, let's just put it that way, are not adherents to abstract principles. They're not like deism, which really has a distant God and one follows a certain set of moral codes. No. They're about relationship with the divine or the transcendent in some way, and this is mediated through particular human figures. So Christianity, Jesus Christ is the incarnate word of God. He is a man who mediates to us the divine. Islam focuses on submission to God, and one follows the way or the revelation and way of life revealed by the Prophet Muhammad. He is a man who reveals the way of God. Judaism, well, you follow the revelation of the Torah, which concerns God's dealings with the patriarchs. And Israel, as a covenanted people, deals with people first and foremost. You then move to other religions. So Buddhism, well, it's following the way of the Buddha. Sikhism is, again, relationship with God as it is mediated by the gurus. Guru Nanak, for example. They teach us how to relate to God. And finally, even Hinduism, while there are some traditions, as there are in Christianity and so on, which are just about pure experience of God beyond all comprehension, many of the traditions focus on avatars of God, often human avatars of God, such as Krishna. So we can see that actually religions tend to be less systems of doctrine or philosophical kind of constructions, and are much more focused on following various human beings in their beliefs and practices as it relates to the divine in various shapes, and even that idea of relating to the divine is framed in terms of loyalty to God or following God or loving God. It's all about relationship to the great or the greatness. So we can automatically see then that actually these great world religions are manifesting in a way what Carlisle was talking about with hero worship. And the way that our minds have these resonances of beliefs with people seems to suggest that our minds are geared towards that in various ways in all of our belief making systems. What this means then, if it's true, is that it's not just about what you believe when you believe something, it's who you follow. Because who you follow or pledge your loyalty to in a kind of strong, deeply felt way is going to cause various beliefs to arise in your mind, maybe as badges of loyalty to that person or to that group. They are markers of your allegiance. And indeed, they may be the way in which you express allegiance to these people and their ideas, or to their way of life, even. One could think of, for example, how in Christianity, the first commandment is to love God with one's heart, all of one's mind, and all of one's spirit and strength. And so the beliefs that follow from that are going to flow from the love that you have for God. So the doctrine of the Trinity, for example, you may come to really truly believe in it because you are experiencing what it is to love God, and so on, with other doctrines too. So beliefs are performative in a way then. They're not just about their own content. They, especially when we express our beliefs to others, we're expressing who we belong to, who we're influenced by, and what it is that we are moved by most. So in this theory then, there is a deeply strong and a strong emotional component to our beliefs, and we are expressing them. But we're doing more than that. We're performing, or we're kind of signaling who it is that we've thrown our lot in with, who we're following. So beliefs are doing, expression of beliefs or intellectual debates are doing more than just the surface level kind of dialogue of it. There's a whole system of meaning underneath, not explicitly stated, which is so important for understanding various interactions. So let's come now to the observations that I made, and we can use what I've just said, this hypothesis, as a way of explaining these various phenomena. So, for example, the emotionally charged nature of intellectual discussion. Well, by itself, the content might arouse emotion. So, for example, if it's something to do with, let's just say, I saw the other day that a trans activist was saying to challenge kind of trans rights is to erase my existence. So we might say, well, in that case, it's emotionally charged because the person believes that the other person is challenging their right to exist, whatever that means. So that's one aspect. And I'm not trying to say my theory is reductive, but another aspect of this is that to say something like trans rights or you're erasing my experience as a trans person. That is performative in the sense that it identifies the speaker with a particular group, i.e., LGBT allies, as you might call them today, or Stonewall, or whoever. Or, for example, if we're having a discussion about safe spaces, and I say, I think it's important that everybody has the right to freedom of expression, and you do not have a right to avoid offense. Well, there is what I've just said by itself, and it's true or false, regardless of what other people feel. But it's saying more than that. At least it could be saying more than that. To somebody else, they might hear, oh, this guy's on the side of Lawrence Fox. He's on the side of Toby Young. And what's more, he actually opposes various rights of, let's say, LGBT rights. That could be the resonance that they hear. So there is a performative quality to our beliefs. And what's more, it's not just group identification, it's actually expression of our loyalties to specific people. To make a claim for climate activism in some way, if it's of the nature of kind of Extinction Rebellion, is to place your loyalty with those people in that organization, maybe to somebody like Greta Thunberg. To make a case for, I don't know, let's say, reactionary views, it is in some way you are making a claim to be loyal to the reactionary tradition and to the figures who stand in it. So somebody like Thomas Carlisle, his name escaped me for a second there. Thomas Carlisle, J.R.R. Tolkien, maybe Julius Evola. You're making a statement of loyalty when you, even if you're not using their names, if you're espousing ideas associated or that resonate with these figures in your own mind or in other people's minds. This is why it becomes so emotional in part, because you're not just saying what you believe, you're also expressing something about who you follow. And this is a very primal thing. You go back to ancient times, which tribe you're in and which leader you follow is a matter of life and death. And as you move through time, I was reading Beowulf earlier. The characters identify themselves by who they follow, not by what they believe, what politics they have, or anything like that. No, Beowulf explains, I am the son of Ecgtheow, that I am a member of the Geats, and my king is such and such. Who you follow defines who you are in many ways. So it's very emotional in part because you're expressing this loyalty, this deeply held loyalty, which will motivate you in various ways. It's also deeply emotional because when somebody attacks your ideas, they're not just attacking your idea by itself in a neutral kind of zone, in a vacuum. Because of these resonances, it's also, there's a under the surface battle going on between various allegiances and loyalties. When somebody attacks what you're doing, then attacks your belief, I should say, they're also attacking the allegiance which underpins that belief to that hero of yours, or that authority or set of authorities. To attack the idea of hero worship, if I'm putting it forward, in a discussion, would also be an attack on my kind of professed loyalty to Thomas Carlyle and his philosophy. There's so many examples of this. So that's why it can become very emotional, I think, because what you're doing when you're challenging somebody else's view is you're threatening that loyalty. You're saying that might be wrong. Indeed, your loyalty might be misplaced. That's a really dangerous thing. It's deeply built within us that we've got to follow the right person, because from an evolutionary perspective, if you're going to survive, you need to follow the right people in ancient times, in prehistoric times even. And maybe that's becoming more and more true now. So I think it's I think that can help to explain a lot of the emotionality in intellectual discussion where there need not be any from a logical point of view. It's deeply ingrained within us, and it's a undercurrent. So what about the second area where it's easy to predict various people's beliefs based off one belief? Well, I think this follows again, right? If you if beliefs are the product of our loyalties, if we believe various things because of the way we feel towards various people, our heroes, you might say, well, then it follows that many of our beliefs will be identifiable by our loyalties. They'll be caused by our loyalties, even if these beliefs themselves contradict in various ways. This to me then makes sense of why we can predict someone's belief quite well, because that sequence of beliefs they have is that which is identified with loyalty to a particular group and the heroes within that group. So in the beginning of this stream, I gave some examples of beliefs that maybe somebody who's a socialist might have. So pro-immigration, yet pro-lockdown, pro kind of climate activism and giant changes, pro-LGBT ally, and so on. As I said, there's no logical connection between all of these, but it's their loyalty to the group which will help to motivate these things. And the same for the conservative, liberal kind of values I was speaking about earlier too. It would work both ways. So that would certainly explain why we can predict, because the hero worship is what we're really identifying. And then finally, it would also help to explain why people change their views on a sixpence to the views they formerly opposed. Because the issue really isn't really that about whether the views are right or wrong per se. What matters more is the loyalty to the ones who are changing the views. So, for example, when I spoke about the Conservative Party in the UK formally opposing an energy a cap on energy prices, and then because it was the Labour Party's policy, but then a few years later defending such a position, what we can say there then is the people who are kind of advocating or adhering to this perspective, they're not concerned about whether the belief itself is right or wrong, really. The reason why they've changed their view is because they're loyal to the Conservative Party, in particular its leadership, and they want to see it win power. They want their heroes, as it were, to win. That's what's fundamental, the loyalty. So they're quite happy to change their beliefs on a dime, because to the opposition point of view, because it expresses their loyalty to those that they revere and admire and want to win. This helps to explain this idea. The same could be seen in the fact that many of Biden's policies are continuations of Trump's policies in some areas, but suddenly, because it's no longer Trump, but it's Biden, his supporters are fine with it, whereas before they were really angry against Donald Trump. This is where the Trump derangement syndrome idea comes in. So this idea that loyalty is expressed and challenged during discussion, and how this can help us to understand how discussions are so emotional, that people's views are predictable, and that people change their views in very odd ways, in as it were. So I think this hypothesis is quite helpful for understanding discussions and their emotional aspect, particularly if it's not reduced to it, but it's just seen as an important part of intellectual discussion or discourse. And I want to now give 3 kind of key areas where I think it's kind of important kind of effects or things we should reflect on, given that if this is true. So the first is that we can better understand the purpose of celebrities and as political voices in our culture. Because, again, if we want to return to the idea of beliefs as motivated by reason, well, you wouldn't really want an actor to be the source of your political point of view if it was about trying to pursue the truth. You wouldn't listen to a sports star on the nature of the economy unless they had done serious training in that area. You wouldn't listen to a musician about the immigration debate if it was a pure matter of rationality. So then why are these people elevated to discuss these issues in very public ways? Why does the media amplify their voices in many ways? Well, one is maybe they agree with various points that the many voices in the media want to be heard. So that would be a part of it. But I think it's more than that. I think it's because many of these people have become they've become the heroes that we worship now. They may not be the great heroes Carlisle wanted, but in many ways they've become the substitutes. This can be particularly seen with actors who play superheroes, for example, or heroic characters. Think of somebody like Emma Watson, who played Hermione in the Harry Potter series. A great character, very noble, very smart, very brave and daring. And she, the actress herself, carries that with her, that's association, even if she is not Hermione Granger herself. And this gives her some sort of authority to speak on political matters, such that she was, at least, I don't know if she still is, the UN ambassador for women. Or think of somebody like Mark Ruffalo. He plays the Hulk in the Avengers movies. So, a really popular franchise, which itself testifies to hero worship in some form, that people all around the world want to watch movies with heroes in them doing great things. So he has that association with himself of being a hero. And he spends a lot of his time talking about politics and trying to influence people. Scarlett Johansson might be another one in that regard. Other people would be sports people. So in the UK, Marcus Rashford is a very famous footballer for Manchester United and for England, and he spent a lot of his time trying to raise awareness about kind of food poverty in the UK. An ex-footballer, Gary Neville, is quite often in the media attacking Boris Johnson. Or in America, you could look at somebody like Colin Kaepernick, who, as an American footballer, he is trying to raise awareness of racial justice or Black Lives Matters. LeBron James would be another. There's all these sorts of people who, because they're in sports, and sports has traditionally been associated with heroes, doing heroic feats on the football pitch or in the boxing ring or whatever. And so they have that residue of the heroic, and so they become figures who then can influence through their voices. These days, even YouTubers can be elevated to such a level. And it might depend on which community you're in, which YouTubers are your heroes, even if you don't think of them in those terms. which ones have you got loyalty to? We literally on Twitter follow people and we want to hear their every word. And then we engage in communities which respond to these people. When these people deviate from what is expected of the hero, I think of somebody like PewDiePie making various comments in the past, but getting into trouble for them, it causes a great scandal because these people are supposed to be the heroes whose views influence us in the ways that YouTube wants us to be influenced. So this is a really important thing to recognize then, that these figures and others, their significance as political voices comes from the fact that so many of our beliefs are kind of products of our loyalty to our heroes. And so if our heroes in the sporting sense start saying X, Y, or Z, or the guys that we liked in the movie start saying X, Y, or Z, we're going to become more amenable to it because we are loyal to them in various ways. So that's kind of the first significant point to raise. The second is the danger of resonances. I can't stress this enough. Oftentimes, and I've been in this case myself once or twice, you say something thinking that you are just saying a neutral statement, or you're only focused on the content of the statement you're making itself. Let's just return to the idea of everybody has a right to free expression. Let's just take that as an example. You might say that not thinking of any of the connotations or any of its associations, but you're just going to put that idea forward. And you really believe that, sincerely you believe that. Well, because of the nature of our beliefs that they are expressions of loyalty to various figures and groups, when somebody else hears that, because of their loyalties and whatnot, they're going to hear various resonances in there. They're going to hear it resonating maybe with Lawrence Fox on the television, or maybe with Ben Shapiro in America. They're going to hear their voices. They're going to see their faces in their mind's eye. And so automatically you become associated with loyalty to these people and the groups they belong to, or something like that. This can then be very dangerous because, and we're seeing this to great effect at the moment, because if you say something which has a resonance which is heretical or blasphemes in a modern context, you're going to be tarred with that brush. And perhaps the kind of greatest example of this is the use of the word fascist. It almost doesn't mean exactly any specific doctrine anymore beyond this thing has a resonance with Nazi Germany. That's what it fundamentally amounts to a lot of the time these days, to say something's fascist. So if you say something which has that resonance, you're going to get tarred with that brush, even if it's not what you're saying. I guess on the flip side, somebody might have a quite left-wing view. Maybe they believe in redistribution of wealth on a very strong level. However, if you say that, you might get associated with wokeness, for example. You may not be actually adhering to many woke beliefs or whatever, but that might be the association or resonance somebody hears when you start using left-wing talking points. So I think it's really important to be considerate of the possible resonances what you say may have in terms of the groups that other people will think you have loyalty to. You may not care, you may be in a position not to care, but I do think it's important not only for navigating the current moment, but also because you want to be identified with groups you want to be identified with, right? And because that's fundamental to who you are. So it's important then to make sure that's that's who you're going down with, that's who you follow. I think that's important. The third and final kind of implication is this. There's a lot of emphasis today on trying to change people's hearts and minds, to trying to influence what they believe. And so much attention is focused on if we get them to have the right understanding of the issue, then they'll believe what we want them to believe. Well, the last years have shown that that definitely isn't the case. It definitely isn't. It definitely isn't the case that most people are influenced by hearing the logic of a position all the time. Perhaps maybe none of the time, but it definitely isn't the primary factor. If we're serious about changing culture or changing people's beliefs, then one of the key things is to give them heroes to follow. You need to change their loyalties first and foremost, because that is where their beliefs come from. You need to change what arouses in them that great passion which motivates their thoughts and behavior. Only in doing so are you going to be able to change their beliefs. But indeed, that's not really the key. The key is to change their loyalties. That's where the change has to begin. If you're just focusing on people's beliefs, they are the effect of their hero worship, of their group identity. So you need to start there. You need to challenge that, and you need to try and find ways to change that, what their group loyalty is. Without doing that, it's a largely futile exercise. The times when intellectual debate are valuable is when people share loyalties. So maybe you belong to the same, roughly speaking, the same Christianity, or at least maybe even Christians. So maybe a Catholic and a Protestant, although there can often be pretty diabolical discussion. If it's done in a good spirit of we both follow Christ, but we're both seeking the truth, and we want to become closer to God, then there's a proper ground for intellectual discussion because you share the same loyalty, and it's about how do we carry out that loyalty. You could say that about so many issues. So maybe it's if you're both fellow communists or fellow reactionaries, you've got a basis there for discussion because you both share loyalty. The communists, well, in theory, they share loyalty to Karl Marx and the tradition of communist theory, maybe to specific thinkers or activists within that. To the reactionary too, you've got a tradition that you're loyal to, and there's various thinkers within that you'll share an appreciation and reverence for. So then when you come to discussing your beliefs, where you're expressing your loyalty, but you already share that. So there's not conflict in the nature of your loyalty. So then your beliefs are about how do we carry that out? How do we manifest that loyalty in the world? And how do we bring that to bear on the world? But beyond that, when there's conflicting loyalties, and there are so many, then it's really difficult to have a very good conversation, or one that's really about seeking the truth. In that case, the real issue is trying to change someone's loyalty. And that isn't, strictly speaking, something you could do discursively. It's often more to do with what we feel in response to people. And so perhaps the question is, are we following the right people? Who are we following? Not what do you believe? So that is my working hypothesis. And I think it explains the three observations that I've made. I think it helps to do that. There's still a lot there that needs to be worked through on the exact connections between things, how kind of the emotional dimension, is it just loyalty? Is there other emotions going on? And, I've emphasized loyalty to group and to heroes. What exactly the relationship between the two is something that I need to think more about. But that is my working hypothesis at the moment, and I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say in the chat and in the comments as well after this stream. I hope it's been of interest. I forgot to mention, but I should mention. So the picture for this stream was of a lady called Anne Hutchinson on trial in New England in 1638. And the reason why I put that there was many of these kind of thoughts that I've had or kind of developed since then on this topic began when I was reading on that incident. Anne Hutchinson was, well, in New England, there was a Puritan community at that time. And a central feature of Puritan piety was an emphasis on examining oneself for signs of salvation. Many of the ministers had been concerned that the doctrine of justification by faith alone, the idea that by faith, if you have faith in Jesus Christ, then you are saved, this was being misunderstood and abused by many of their congregation who were saying, well, I believe that I'm saved by Jesus, so I must be saved. And then going and living lives filled with sin and no concern for prayer and Bible reading and love of God. So they wanted to emphasize that no, actually, you are justified by faith alone. But if you are justified by faith, this will manifest in a change in your behavior so that you will start doing the things a child of God would do. And so this placed an emphasis upon sanctification, this process of transformation. And they said that if you want to be assured of your salvation, do not look to justification, but look to whether there's change in your life. What does that mean then for the Anne Hutchinson? Well, she came across in 1636 to New England from England, and she was a member of the Boston First Church, which was led by John Cotton. John Cotton was a great exponent of free grace, and he emphasized that assurance should not be found in sanctification, but rather in justification. Indeed, Hutchinson formed a Bible study which really kind of where they were exponents of this. And she went as far as saying that looking to one's sanctification is in itself an act of heresy or blasphemy, because you're really saying that it's by your works that you're saved. So she was overheard saying that the ministers who taught this way of this kind of salvation were in fact not ministers of the gospel, that they did not have the covenant of grace, but they actually had the covenant of works. A few years later, when this had reached crisis point, there was a great division within the colony concerning these theological details. Hutchinson and a few others were put on trial. And the charge laid against Hutchinson was not that her belief was unorthodox. This was a legal trial where she was charged with bringing dissension into the colony by bringing the reputation of the ministers into disrepute, by claiming that they were teaching false doctrine. But that was the implication of her theology, that if what she said was true, then it would follow what they taught was not true. So she was undermining their authority. And this led me to the kind of conclusion, well, actually then a lot of our debates challenge, or a lot of our points of view affirm or challenge various loyalties to authority figures or heroes. And that's what she was doing, and that's why she was on trial. She was undermining the loyalty of the colony to the heroes of the colony, the ministers. So that's why I picked that as the kind of image for this stream. So let me have a wee look through the chat and see what's been said since the last pause, and we'll get back to it. So, hello, Johnny the Great. Good to see you. I really hope that's your surname. Hello to you, James Storer. Nice to see you too. You have a question about, yes, I do go to the University of Edinburgh. I'm a member of staff at the university. What is your experience of Edinburgh and the wokeness there? I'm going to university next year. I don't want to talk about this on a live stream, I'm afraid, James. I think it's a contentious topic amongst staff and students. And so if you want to talk about it more, then you can reach out to me on Twitter and just send me a message. But I think it's best not to discuss it on a live stream, especially given what I've just said about resonances and whatnot. I don't think it's a wise idea. It's fun to listen on 1.5 speed. The moment you catch up, the speaker sounds drunk. Who's to say I'm not drunk, Matthew? In the US now, unfortunately, athletes are celebrities, indistinguishable from Hollywood performers. Yes, there's been a growing culture of them mingling in those circles and becoming celebrities. And I guess the wages they're on now kind of facilitates such a lifestyle. But it's also because there's a lack of heroes in our lives in the same way. You know, the only heroes we've got are Marvel heroes and sports stars. I think is a testament to the dearth of real heroes, that a reactionary masterpiece like Lord of the Rings could be made into a trilogy and be one of the most revered and loved trilogies of all time. People love the heroes in it. To a lesser extent, Harry Potter 2 has that power. So I think it's symptomatic of a deeper problem than just that. But in itself, you know, there are athletes who are heroic in various ways, and that's not to be overlooked. Mongolian. 'Twas ever thus. In fact, the social standing of an Olympian would have been significantly higher than that of an actor in the ancient world, and on. Yeah, so it's not a recent problem then in that regard. But again, there may be great heroes amongst sports stars. It's just about which ones, isn't it? Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer, was based, so the mainstream media covered that side of him up. He was for in-group preferences and drew attention to how they're wholesome and natural. Didn't like that at all, and so the mass public didn't get to hear him on it. Interestingly, he appeared on Michael Parkinson, who did a lot of interviews with famous people. And I remember watching an interview where Muhammad Ali basically said he believed that black people should only marry black people and white people should only marry white people. And I wonder if he was a black separatist, because he thought it was, as you say in the next one, wholesome and natural. So he had various views which were very strongly condemned by the media in that regard. Yes, I think he's a very interesting character, and I think actually boxing, because it often involves a lot of people who are outside of the mainstream system or institutions. I think of somebody like Tyson Fury and Mike Tyson, for that matter. It tends to draw people who have views which are not what you might expect. So I think it's quite an interesting sport in that regard. It's probably worth a whole stream in itself. And interestingly, good connection here, Mike Tyson actually had a discussion with AJ Eyre, who we were discussing earlier. Tyson was coming on very strong to Naomi Campbell, I think, at a party, and was probably going to do like some bad stuff. And AJ Eyre, this like Oxford Don, comes across and tries to intervene, and actually Yeah, he managed to stop Mike Tyson from hurting Naomi Campbell, which I think is pretty cool, if that's the right person. Be loyal to the higher power. Don't give power to dust, because that will be what you get in the end if you do. Dust and dust can't maintain dust. Amen, Matt. Amen. Famous episode of Ali on Phil Donahue, early 70s, railing on white people. Yes, he was very forceful on that, and it often quite shocked people because they didn't know really how to handle it. I guess most of the guests on these shows wouldn't have ever put anything like that to them. At the same time, because Ali was a black guy, you can't just call him out as a racist in the same way that you probably could have if he was a white guy. So I think that's probably part of it too. Yeah, so I'll just give a few minutes before, so that people can put any further comments in the chat. But before so while I give that chance, I'll just update you on a few things. So the next few weeks, I should be pretty much just marking, to be honest. There's going to be so much marking to do, lots of end of term essays, and this year it's because of COVID, they've reduced the number of exams, so it's mostly online essays that people have had to do. So there's going to be a lot of 2,000 to 3,000 word essays to mark over the next few weeks, I should say, and they all have to be done within a very short time. So I think it's going to be unlikely that I'll get any videos or streams out before Christmas. Or the new year. I think this might be the last one till the new year. Maybe one I'll talk about in a second, but in general, it's unlikely. And then next semester, I'm going to be very busy. I've got I'm very pleased to say that I've been awarded a book contract to write on my research, and I have a few articles that I've committed to doing, and a few keynote speeches that I'm giving. So that means then that I'm just going to be struggling for time to do all these things, essentially. So there may be, I mean, I don't post that often as it is on here. It's a rarity sometimes. But my hope is that maybe once a month I'll be able to do something moving forward. At least that's what I'm aiming for, once a month, and anything else is a bonus. And hopefully that's okay. Yes. So regarding things coming up, well, so the origins of equality series. Somebody was asking about that earlier. I think that was Byron Brand. Yes, I do have 2 more videos planned in that series for the time being. The first is the first one was on the levelers, and some of you may have seen that already. So the next video was going to be on the diggers, and they saw themselves as the true levelers, going further than the levelers and taking their ideas to their logical extreme. So that will be a wee video, and maybe I'll get that out before Christmas, but we'll just have to see. And then the third and final video in that series is going to be on the Quakers. The Quakers have quite the reputation for spreading equality and those ideas. But oftentimes people focus on their later development in the American context. But I thought it would be interesting to look at their origins and how ideas of equality, in very radical ways, were at the heart of the Quaker movement from the very beginning. So that will be the third installment of that series. Beyond that, there is something that I want to draw your attention to. On January the 3rd, it is Tolkien's birthday, J.R.'s Tolkien's birthday. And after a little conversation with Apostolic Majesty, we're going to do a live stream, God willing. on the scouring of the Shire, the chapter forgotten by the films, the chapter at the end of the story, but in so many ways is one of the most interesting. And there may be some other Tolkien-related videos, not just on my channel, but on AM's channel, and maybe some others. A kind of mini Tolkien day, you might say. So look out for that. There might be more information in the future, or there will be, and it should be great fun. I can't wait for that. It's going to be super. And yeah, so let's see. Is anybody? Let's see. When troubadours had the ear of a monarch and they used it to plant their ideas, it was seen as deeply sinister. Only when everyone knows who the discuss jocker is does their opinion count. Yes, I think that's probably right. Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate your congratulations for the book. It's not due out till well, it's not to be submitted till 2023, so there's a bit of time there to get it written up. Well, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk again, and we've covered quite a range of topics today. A lot of different thinkers and ideas, and putting them together and mashing them into a lovely I don't know where I'm going with this analogy, but yeah, it's been good fun, and we've covered a lot of contemporary topics as well and relevant ideas in the current moment. And hopefully none of my words have given resonances, evoked resonances in your mind which made you deeply upset. But if they have, I can only profusely apologize. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, wherever you are, and that you have a very blessed weekend and a good start to the week. And I look forward to seeing you again in the future. God bless you all, one and all. Goodbye.